So, where does the beginning actually begin? Looking back, there are probably 100 different places I could choose, but if I'm trying to understand how I ended up doing what I do today, I think one of the earliest clues was hiding somewhere I definitely wasn't looking for it. I spent a ridiculous amount of my teenage years playing video games. And if you had asked my parents at the time whether any of those hours were contributing to my future, I'm pretty sure the answer would have been no. Honestly, I probably would have agreed with them. I wasn't playing video games because I thought they were going to help me build a career, right? I wasn't trying to become a professional gamer. There was no master plan behind any of it. I was a teenager. I liked video games, and that was pretty much the entire strategy. But somewhere between playing those games, recording the moments I liked, cutting frag videos in Sony Vegas Pro, discovering After Effects, becoming interested in the things people were creating for games, and eventually learning different software, I was accidentally learning something about myself. I just didn't know it yet, right? At some point, simply playing games wasn't enough for me, right? I started becoming interested in the moments inside them, a good play, a sequence that looked cool, something that happened with the music playing at the exactly right moment. I wanted to take those moments and make something out of them. So I started making frag videos and highlight edits. And that's how I found Sony Vegas Pro, the editing software. At the time, I wasn't thinking about editing as a profession. I don't even think I was properly thinking about it as a skill. I just wanted the video in my head to look cool. But once you try to make something, even something as simple as a gaming edit, you suddenly have problems that you didn't have 5 minutes earlier. So where do I cut this? Why does this moment feel slow? What happens if the music changes here? Can I make this hit harder? Why does this version feel better than the previous one? You just start making all these little decisions. And the funny thing is, nobody had assigned this to me. There was no grade. There was no teacher waiting for the project. There was no client. If the video was terrible, basically nothing happened. I could just make another one, and I think that freedom was incredibly valuable because I wasn't afraid of being bad at it. I was allowed to experiment. There's something else I understand better now. Sometimes when you decide, okay, I'm gonna learn editing, learning itself becomes the objective, right? You watch tutorials, you take notes, memorize buttons, and follow somebody else's project. But when you're trying to make something you genuinely want to make, the skill becomes the obstacle between you and the thing in your head. So you learn because you need it, right? That's more or less what I was doing, basically. I would imagine something and I wouldn't know how to do it, then I would try to figure it out. Then one software started leading me toward another. Sony Vegas introduced me to editing. Then I started exploring After Effects, and After Effects was a bit different because now I wasn't only editing things together, right? I could manipulate the image itself. Then there was Blender, 3D, and again, I wish I could tell you this was some beautifully planned education where teenage me had researched the film industry and created a 5-year development plan, but it wasn't, it was completely chaotic. So I would see something interesting and think, how do you do that? Right? Then I tried to figure it out. Sometimes I'd learn enough to make whatever I wanted to make, and sometimes I'd get distracted by something else. Sometimes I'd probably spend hours learning something that I never used again. There was no syllabus connecting any of this, right? I was just curious. Funny, The game, Dota, was another big part of that, actually. I was playing a lot of it, like thousands of hours. And through that world, I became interested in the Valve workshop. You know, there was fascinating things because suddenly I wasn't only looking at the game as something I consumed. There were people actually making things for it, like objects, designs, 3D models, and eventually looking at them wasn't enough for me. Right? I wanted to make one. But the problem was I knew basically nothing about 3D, right? So I found this tutorial on YouTube that was around 2 hours long, showing how to make 3D model for a game. And I watched that thing. I don't know, probably like 40 times, beginning to end, you know, over and over. And the thing is, I wasn't trying to learn Blender. I wanted to make the thing. So learning Blender was simply the problem standing between me and the thing I wanted to make. And eventually I made it, right? Then I made another one and another one. While I was still in high school, I ended up making more than 20 different objects for Dota and sharing my work on the Valve workshop. Now you might ask, were they incredible? Probably not. I was a high school kid teaching himself 3D from the same 2 hour YouTube tutorial. He'd apparently decided to watch it for the rest of his life, but that wasn't really the important part. For the first time, I had gone from looking at something inside a game and thinking, how somebody make this, to actually making something myself. And I think that's where that question started changing for me. Instead of only asking, how do I play this? I started asking, how did somebody make this? And eventually, can I make it too? And looking back, I think that was a pretty important change for me, you know, because once I become interested in how something is made, I have a difficult time leaving it alone. I want to look behind it. I want to understand what somebody did. And usually, eventually, I want to try it myself. Film started doing the same thing to me. Obviously, I always watch movies as movies. You know, you follow the story, you like a certain character, and you enjoy the spectacle. But at some point, part of my brain started getting distracted by what was happening behind the image. Pirates of the Caribbean was one of those films for me. I'd look at something on the screen and think, how the hell did they do that, right? Not in some deep philosophical way, but literally. Oh, hello. How are you guys? Hi. Who's this guy? What's his name? Kito. Nice to meet you. You have a wonderful night. Nice, so cute. So basically, I was thinking, how did they make that, right? Because I know that thing doesn't exist. I know somebody didn't just point a camera at that thing and press record, right? So what happened between the camera and the image I'm watching now? I didn't understand visual effects as an industry. I didn't know all the departments involved. I didn't know the software. I didn't know the people doing the work. And I definitely didn't know that years later, visual effects would become my profession. There was just this feeling of wanting to look behind the curtain. I wanted to understand the trick. And this is where telling your own story many years later become a little dangerous, because now I know what happened. I know where I went to university, I know where I worked, I know that eventually I moved to another country, I know that visual effects became my career. So it's very tempting for me to look back, a teenage owner watching Pirates of the Caribbean, and say, there it is. That's where I decided to become a VFX artist. But that's not true, you know. I didn't decide anything. I was just curious, that's all. And I think it's important that I don't rewrite that kid into somebody who knew where he was going. And just because I know where he ended up. He didn't. I didn't. There was no straight line. Actually, that's one of the reasons I will tell these stories chronologically, because if you continue watching this channel, you're gonna see all of these things change. You're going to see me choose what I want to study. You're going to see me start working, and some of those random skills become professionally useful. You're gonna see me leave Turkey and start again in Canada. And much later in the story, even Pirates of the Caribbean is gonna come back into my life in a way that teenage me could never possibly have predicted, right? I'm probably not gonna tell you how yet, but we will get there. But that's what I find fascinating about looking at your life this way, When you're living it, you only see what's in front of you. You don't know which little interests are gonna disappear next month and which ones are quietly becoming part of who you are, right? So maybe you're in that stage right now. You're interested in 10 different things and none of them seem to connect, right? And when somebody asks what you're gonna do with any of it, the honest answer is, I don't know. And I think that's okay. Eventually you do have to make decisions, and curiosity without discipline doesn't take you very far, But before you decide what deserves years of your life, I think you need enough experiences to actually learn something about yourself. When I was making those gaming videos, I wasn't choosing a career. I was discovering that I liked solving visual problems. When I opened After Effects or Blender, I wasn't building a resume. I was just discovering that not knowing how to do something didn't frustrate me enough to stop. It just made me want to figure it out, When I started making those objects for Dota, I was discovering that I didn't only want to consume creative work. I wanted to understand how it was made, and see if I could make it myself. And when I watched Pirates of the Caribbean and wondered how those images were possible, I was becoming interested in a world I didn't even know enough about to call a career. So none of these things gave me an answer, but each one gave me little more information about the kind of person I was becoming. And I'm glad I wasn't trying to turn every one of those little interests to something useful, because as you get older, it's very easy to start asking whether everything deserves the time that you're giving it. Can I make money from this? Can it become a business? Will it help my career? Can I put it on my resume? Is this productive? By the way, don't get me wrong, I'm not against any of those questions. I eventually built a large part of my life around working very hard, but curiosity needs some room to be useless. You're allowed to become interested in something simply because you wanted to understand it, right? You're allowed to be bad at it when nobody's paying you, grading you, or waiting for the delivery. You're even allowed to spend months learning something that eventually goes nowhere, right? Not every interest needs to become a side hustle. And I actually think turning every curiosity into a side hustle is a very efficient way to destroy curiosity. But every once in a while, something keeps pulling you back. For me, editing did, images did. That question, how did somebody make this, did. And I didn't realize it yet, but those repeated returns were probably telling me more about my future than the answer I gave whenever somebody asked what I wanted to become. Because while all of these things were happening, I thought I was going to become a veterinarian. Seriously, that was my plan, right? I loved animals, I still do. And somewhere along the way, I had decided that loving animals meant I should probably spend my life working with them. Meanwhile, I was spending more and more of my free time editing, experimenting with software, thinking about images and trying to understand how creative things were made. if I write the list today, it looks almost embarrassingly obvious, right? Let's start. Gaming, editing, Sony Vegas Pro, After Effects, Blender, then 3D, Valve Workshop, movies, visual effects, and you can look at that list and say, Honor, come on, right? But that's because you're looking at it all at once. I was not living it all at once. I was living one day at a time, right? Inside my own head, these were just things I liked doing, right? They were my future. I just didn't see the contradiction yet. And I think that's the thing I would tell someone who's trying to figure out what they should do with their life. Don't only listen to the answer you give when somebody asks what you want to become. Watch your own behavior. What do you keep coming back when nobody's making you do it? What kind of problem makes you forget how long you've been sitting there? What do you research because you're genuinely annoyed that you don't understand it? What do you try again after the first attempt is terrible? Those things don't automatically tell you what your career should be, but they are information. And when you're young, you need information, specifically about yourself. I didn't have enough yet, you know? I had a collection of interests, I had some basic skills, and I had questions. And I had absolutely no idea where any of them were going, but the pattern was beginning to become visible, just not to me, you know? Someone else was about to notice it first, my high school teacher. And years later, I think that's what makes this period of my life interesting to me, because I thought I was wasting time playing games, you know? I thought I was making little videos because they were fun. I thought I was opening random software because I was curious. None of it felt important enough to call it direction. But before I knew what I wanted to become, I was already leaving little pieces of evidence everywhere. You know, in the videos I made, in the software I kept opening, you know, in the movies that made me ask how they were created, in the things I kept returning to without anybody asking me to. So eventually, I didn't know where I was going yet, but apparently I had already started walking.